Hi, this is Jim Steinmeyer. It's February 2025, and I welcome you to the new Genii magazine for February 2025, a newly reconfigured magazine, and I'm here as your new editor. If you're wondering what's happened, Richard Kaufman has retired. Richard and Liz Kaufman did Genii for the last 25 years and did an amazing job with it. And Richard had set his retirement date and decided that he was going to stop after a certain period of time. If you're curious, you will note that Richard is still in the pages of this magazine. That's an amazing story, and I'm proud to start with that. Richard very quickly volunteered to do the Magicana column. As you know, Magicana is our historic column, the great column that always brought you the finest magic over the course of Genii magazine. And Richard said to me, I would volunteer to stay on and do the Magicana column because I know exactly kind of how that column should be done and where I can get material and how it should be described. And of course, he is, as you know, the past master of that. Even before he was editor of Genii, Richard was very well known in the magic world for his ability to gather together material and describe it, illustrate it, and explain it, and also get magicians to trust him with their material. So he's back doing exactly that. When Richard volunteered, I didn't wait for him to finish the sentence before I said yes. I was worried that he might change his mind. And so he's agreed, and he is in the pages of Magicana. You'll find him there. Our magic continues with magic that was put together by Noah Levine. Noah is one of our talented editors as we move forward. He's the magic editor. Magicians in New York know him well. He's been performing at Tannen's for years. Noah has been gathering together magic. You're going to see a fine assortment of it in our first issue, and that will, of course, continue as we move on. Vanessa Armstrong has been the editor of The Eye for years. She's been bringing you the news in Genii. She's back. She's still an editor here. We're proud to have her. And she's also working on individual stories and working with columnists. You'll see an enlarged Eye section, and we're really proud of it. We think it will be there bringing you the world of magic for that month, be telling you the latest news, and we'll be bringing you photographs as well. And Chloe Olowitz, you've been reading her work over the years in Genii. You might not always recognize that she's written the articles, but she's written so many features in Genii on various personalities. This month, she's actually starting her new job with a piece called What Is This Magazine?, which is a piece, a little bit of history about Genii magazine, but more a kind of pop culture look at what magazines are, where they fit into the world of magic, where they have fit in the past, and what we might look at in the future. And because of that, it's a really interesting story about what we might expect and what we're all hoping to do with Genii magazine. So please take a look at Chloe's story. She's our editor-at-large. It's a very, very interesting fit between magic and pop culture, and we think you're going to enjoy it. Our boss in charge of publications here is Julie Yang. Julie's done an amazing job of putting this all together, and she's going to continue with other publication projects in the future. Of course, in charge of the whole thing is Randy Pitchford, who's been inspiring to us and supportive, has been an amazing have provided an amazing support team for Richard and Liz Kaufman, and is determined to bring Genii into the future to a new generation of magicians and as a focus for the world of magic in general. So we're grateful to all of Randy's support through this effort. Now, it's going to take you a little while to figure out Genii magazine. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Genii was going to have a series of rotating columnists, and it's going to take 2 or 3 months till you really meet the different columnists and you get a sense of what our different features are all about. You're going to see a wide variety of stories, short interviews, points of view, different perspectives, philosophies, all gathered together. We think you're going to love the mix. Occasionally, you might come across a column or an article that you don't like. That's just fine. We invite you to send something to us and let us know about how you feel about all that. You're going to find a page in this magazine, which is called Mailbox. When I was a kid growing up, those pages were called Letters to the Editor. Here's how it used to work. You would take a piece of paper, put it in something called a typewriter, roll the platen, and you would type a letter to Bill Larson, and then you would put a stamp on the envelope and send it in. We don't do that anymore, but what you'll find is that you can get in touch with us with the speed of any electronic communication. You can literally send us an email that we will get in seconds. And we're hoping that our readers will give us a little blast. They'll tell us what they like. They'll tell us what they'd like to see more of. They tell us what they don't like, because all of that is important to us. our goal is to put together a mix for the world of magic moving forward. And we think that that's a really interesting challenge. You know, it's harder than just putting together 5 or 6 people every month to write about the same subjects. And that's why it's going to take you a few months till you meet the various personalities and the various features that are involved in telling you the Genii story. Now, this is normally the spot where I would step back and very proudly tell you about our editors and our columnists and how amazed I am at this collection of talent and these people. And I realized that I don't have to do that right now. I don't have to do that because you're holding it in your hands. You're able to access it online. And now Genii can finally speak for itself. So all the boasting I've been doing, all the planning that Julie and I have been doing with our editors to bring you this new magazine, you're holding it. We'll continue to refine it. We'll continue to improve it. And with your help, we'll continue to improve it. But finally, you're going to get a taste of what we're doing, and you're going to start meeting Noah Levine and Vanessa Armstrong and Chloe Olowitz and our many talented writers as you turn the pages of the magazine. And that is exactly how it should be. I'm proud that we've gotten to that moment, and long may it continue. You're going to find an interesting column at the beginning of the magazine, and that's this column, The Genii Speak. Now, some of you might puzzle over that name for a second. Since 1936, the column was called Genii Speaks, and it was all about the pronouncements of the editor. And we've slightly changed that focus. We've added a plural to it, and we scratched our head over what William Larson Sr. meant originally when he made some choices. I'm going to let you read all that and speculate about that yourself. It's a really interesting story, a little bit of a historical puzzle about why it was put together that way. And we hope you enjoy that story and that you think about it yourself. So from now on, the Genii speak, and we will explain to you exactly what that means as we move ahead. I'm going to finish with a little interview that I've just done with Peter Lamont. Peter is a professor at the University of Edinburgh. He's written amazing books on magic, magic history, magic philosophy, and psychology. And his latest book, called Radical Thinking, offered us an amazing excerpt which talks about the way we think, the way we process information, and typical of Peter and his perspective is he used magic examples to tell that story and explain it in the setting of the city of Edinburgh. So I had a chance to talk with him about that, and I want you to be able to enjoy that before you read the excerpt. Thanks very much, and we'll see you here next month. Have a great February. So this is Pete Lamont, and Pete is coming from Edinburgh, and that's fitting because he's our cover story for the very first new Genii, the February 2025 Genii, and it's his excerpt from his book Radical Thinking, which is on the cover, which is a very interesting look at the way we process information, and in a really amazing way, it translates it to a map, not necessarily a map, but a kind of walking tour of Edinburgh, which lets him talk about the historical aspects of it and the thoughts that were around and the people that did it. So it's both entertaining and a book about thinking at the same time, and of course magic comes through it as well. So how did this book come together? What was the form of this? It's really different than the previous books you've done for the public.
Yeah, it came, I'd like to blame COVID for
everybody else does.
Yeah. It was before that. So basically I was walking up north thinking about what to do next in terms of teaching and research, which is what pays the bills, and decided that the most useful thing I could do, rather than do more of what I've been doing before, is to get into critical thinking, which to a teacher is maybe the most important thing. So I began to do some research on the history of critical thinking. And what you find is in the literature, the expert literature, it's all over the place in terms of what critical thinking is, of how you do it, of what it is, of what it should be applied to. Even fundamentalists think critical thinking is a good thing. They just think it should be used to challenge any facts that contradict biblical truth. That's a problem if we're talking critical thinking, in my opinion. So I basically, so I did some research on the history of it, noticed one or two trends, and then thought, I want to bring this into teaching. So I came up with a critical thinking course, which I taught at the University of Edinburgh, where I work, which, in order to do the course the way I wanted to, I made it for 0 credits. I won't bother explaining why. It just, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do in terms of getting critical thinking across. I didn't want it to be about marking, which ends up getting an answer right. I wanted to be about the process of thinking itself. Anyway, so I put the course together, ran it 2019. Students loved it. It kind of sold out, as it were, within a week.
Mm-hmm.
In that course, I did tricks, I did a couple of jokes, I told stories, anything that would get the curiosity of students. There were no slides, there were no lecture notes. It was just me talking to the students in the room about how we can find the world more interesting. And unless we do that, we're never going to think critically. You've got to be motivated to do it. And then what I found out was that in the teaching of it, magic came in really handy. If you want to get people curious, magic's great. And in terms of the themes that I think you need to begin with, that everything you think depends on what you notice. Mm-hmm. You notice something, it won't cross your mind. Whatever you notice, you have to interpret it. These are the foundations of all our beliefs about everything. They're based on what we notice, how we interpret it. Then we have these beliefs, and there's always a menu of beliefs from which you can choose, and so on. Okay, so I built it up from not far from common sense, really. Now, then you can use magic to talk about what you notice and what you miss, and how you interpret things this way or that way, and what you believe is going on. So the course didn't begin as a magic-related thing, but in the delivery of it, there was a fair bit of magic on it. And then COVID struck, and I couldn't do it. I refused to do it online because I had to be a live interaction with human beings, not some online video. And then because I couldn't do that, I decided to make it into a book.
Right.
And then that became radical thinking.
Right. Right. And of course, we have an excerpt from the first chapter, but even then, even in the first chapter, you know, the magic is right there. I say the connections to magic, and readers will see this, is you talk about figures that have marched through our history, as well as the history of critical thinking that you're saying. And it's interesting because it's Edinburgh based. Your analogies are Edinburgh based, but you're talking about many big subjects, which I think the readers will certainly find interesting in terms of your use of magic as well. Arthur Conan Doyle and Houdini, and their disagreements, and also the Davenport brothers, you know, coming through Europe and sort of changing the way everybody looks at that stuff. It's interesting because I think that you know, that whole challenge of psychic phenomenon and what's real and what isn't real is also a theme of you know, that sort of thinking and things that you've written about over the years. You know, you use that through this of you know, how our beliefs are challenged and how historically that's been established as well. And I think it's interesting seeing that coming from that viewpoint of a certain city, and you know, what happened here, and how at that moment that changed the way people were looking at things. You know, is that something that you've been really analytical about that in previous books, about the way that we look at and evaluate those kind of illogical thoughts and turn them into logical thoughts? Is that something you learned kind of coming out of magic as well in your demonstrations of it?
Yes, I mean, the Edinburgh Focus was, one, a practical thing, COVID again. So I didn't have anywhere else to go at the time. But also the basis of it is that we always see the world from wherever we are. And so I thought, well, I'm going to look at the world from where I am, and that was Edinburgh. So that's why. And then you look around and find that you can talk about anything just from seeing stuff around you. You could do it from LA, you could do it from New York or London or a million other places. So my stuff is Edinburgh Focus, but as you mentioned, a lot of the people are just passing through. So
Right.
Conan Doyle, he was brought up in the same square that my office is on. So he's obvious, and Sherlock Holmes gets you a lot of people who know the character, and you can use that to talk about what we notice, what we don't, and so on. Houdini played the Festival Theatre, which is, well, the Empire Palace Theatre, now the Festival Theatre, which is just round the corner from that square. And the Davenports, they performed just down the road. And so, because I know that stuff pretty well, I can use that as a way to talk about great big things like how we see the world.
Right.
And all I need is an Edinburgh connection to keep it as a kind of local tour.
Right.
And then use these bigger figures who obviously aren't from Edinburgh to illustrate certain themes.
Right.
And the Davenports became I've used them for a long time now. About 30 years I've given talks about the nature of belief. And I often use the Davenport brothers as an example of the way our options are created. So whatever belief you have about psychic phenomena or anything else, you have an option to believe or not, and so on. So to believe in this, not that. So it's a really nice way and quite a quirky pair of characters to use to talk about how we think about everything, really.
Yeah. Our readers will see that the Davenports also come up in our almanac this month. We're talking about Henry Irving's impersonation of the Davenports, which was his first big career move, actually. Put him on the road as an actor. So some of those things are vitally important to many people as we march through history. It's interesting. You've always had an interest in magic, and you've used the analogies really interestingly in your work. But it's in knowing you, I know we've talked about it. You actually worked as a professional magician for a while, which I think is interesting that rather than just it being a hobby and you using the analogies, you actually kind of sat there with audiences and had to make it work. What was that experience like, and how do you still apply that? Obviously, you apply it because you're using it in class. You're using examples of that, which I think is interesting.
I should say, Eric Mead has a very funny line about what do you call a magician who has 6 gigs a year? Semi-pro, right? So I'm aware I never worked as much as Eric and other. I was a semi-pro in the sense I probably did about 50 or 60 gigs a year, and I did that for the money. I'll be clear about it. I had to put myself through university. I went to university late in life. I didn't have any money, so I had to pay the bills, and that was something I'd had as a hobby. And you can get decent money for short hours compared to working in a bar, being a waiter, whatever. So that was a very practical thing. But of course, as many people who read Genii will know, doing magic for a paying audience is very, very different from whether it's friends or strangers who come and see you. Because my jobs were going to a hotel, a bar, a restaurant, a function room of some kind, and interrupting people when they were doing something that they went to go to do. Typically they're having a meal, having a conversation, and your job is, and this is maybe where I was slightly different from some magicians I knew. Most magicians I knew were concerned about what tricks to do. Right. My primary concern was, how can I justify walking up to a group of strangers and interrupting them and saying, stop that, look at me, and then get paid for it? So that's just basic social psychology. You've got to have a way to do that. And so most of my thought went into how can I do that without them being annoyed? And then how can I make them, even people who don't like magic, and there are some out there, want to see something. So it has to be not just the tricks. It was always about the framing of it, which I find interesting. In terms of then how that shaped my work later, well, that's how I ended up in a psychology department. which was my first job with Richard Wiseman on the psychology of magic. And then I decided to become an academic later on. So I began as an academic because of magic, and then decided if I'm going to continue to be an academic, I need to broaden it a bit. And that's when I got into other questions, like questions of belief, such as belief in psychic phenomena and so on. And of course, magic's got a lot to say about that.
Right, right. Interesting. So your book is coming out in paperback. In fact, if readers are clever about it, they can probably order it just about when this issue comes out, and order it on Amazon, and you probably can get a paperback edition now of Radical Thinking, which is our excerpt. And what's in the works? I know you're thinking about you were saying you were thinking about a next subject for a book for the public.
Well, this book is for the public, and
Right.
I should say, this book was never written for magicians.
Right.
It's for anyone who's it's about how we think about the world. There is, though, as it turns out, a lot of themes that are magic or magic related, which I think are potentially interesting to magicians in terms of how magic can be framed. You know, there's a lot of stuff for some years now to do with, you know, magic and meaning and
right.
shamanism and so on, and that's fine. But you don't need that stuff. That you can find ways to frame magic from the most ordinary, everyday circumstances. The next book has really nothing to do with magic at all. It's a new history of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one for the public, really, to talk about how psychology was invented by human beings. It's not some weird thing that was given to us by God. People studied people, and it's always going to be a human creation, psychology, and we need to keep that in mind if we're going to start talking about ourselves in ways that we've come to. We now use the language of psychology in a way that we never did. So it's really about how we see ourselves and how it's changed over time.
Right. Right.
That's the next book. That's started, but it's not officially in the works yet.
Right. Sounds great. Big project. Well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being in our first new issue. Thanks for being our cover story. And I think we're talking to you about maybe coming back with a couple other insights as we keep going, and that would be fantastic. And good luck with all your projects.